Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the fulfilled prophecies of Jesus. And I'm also going to make mention of some of the signs that we can find right now of the end times. And so Jesus had referred to a lot of different signs of the end times. And we're noticing some of these things occurring now. I'm even going to talk a little bit about China's plans to dominate the world. And of course, the World Economic Forum's plans for related issues. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and how some of these ideas fulfill what we expected. So in Psalm 118:22, we have one prophecy: the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. That is just the beginning. It's the prophecy, of course, of Jesus. And then we get into some more. So let me just see if I can switch this. Hopefully you guys will be able to see this better. So says right here, and if you remember this, the world will exist. This is something that was prophesied. This is something that appeared in the Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin wrote these words, and in the parentheses here, you see Michael Brown's insertions. But the Sanhedrin believed this in Sanhedrin 97. You can look it up right now. It's online. It's easy to find. And this was after the time of Jesus. They said they believed the world will exist 6,000 years, 2,000 years of desolation, which Michael Brown says was between Adam and Abraham, 2,000 years of Torah, which is between Abraham and somewhere around the beginning of the Common Era, and 2,000 years of the Messianic era. See, we are part of that era now, and that was supposed to be the last 2,000 years. Very interesting. This is a school of Eliyahu from the Sanhedrin, the Jewish people. It says, but because our iniquities were many, all this has been lost. And so they believe that the Messiah did not come at the expected time. However, as a Christian, I believe that the Messiah did come at the expected time. And so this is what they said. That is the course that history was to take. But due to our sins, that time frame increased. The Messiah did not come after 4,000 years past. And furthermore, the years that elapsed since then, which were to have been the Messianic era, have elapsed. And so you can know that the Jewish people were very much expecting a Messiah to come during Jesus's time. In fact, other people came and pretended that they were the Messiah, but their followings died out after they died. And so we have Gamaliel making mention of that in Acts 5, how if this movement is from God, the Jewish people would not be able to stop it. So he let Peter and another apostle go at that point. The Messiah in the Old Testament was described in two ways: both as a humble and suffering servant. You can compare that with Zechariah 9:9 and Zechariah 12:10, Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22, and as a mighty king and conqueror, as we see in Zechariah 14:8-9. In Micah 5:2, we learn that the Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem, while in Daniel 7:13, we're told that he will arrive by coming in the clouds of heaven. Of course, you remember Mark 14:60 referring to that, Mark 14:62, and you will see the Messiah, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming in the clouds of heaven. That is one reason why the Jewish people decided to crucify Jesus. They had to stop the movement. They knew that he was equating himself with God. In Daniel 9, we're also told he'll be cut off from humanity, while in Isaiah 9, we're told that he's going to live and reign forever. How can these two types of messiahs be reconciled? Well, here's what's really interesting. The Jewish tradition, as mentioned in Sanhedrin 98a, did realize that there were two types of messiahs in their scriptures. And they said, if the people of Israel will be righteous, the Messiah will come in the clouds of heaven. If they will not be righteous, he will come as a poor man riding upon an ass. And that's again referring to Zechariah 9:9. See your king lowly and humble riding on a donkey. Who rides donkeys anymore? So Jesus reconciled these seemingly divergent messiahs. He's both the suffering servant and the glorious king who will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. His crucifixion was the sacrifice of the strongest for the benefit of the weakest, which is an inversion of the survival of the fittest concept in Darwinian evolution. On Calvary, he reconciled God's perfect love, mercy, and justice. Okay, I see right now, I'm looking at the screen and I don't see some of this stuff moving, so I might have to go back to my other kind of screen. Okay. So again, Zechariah 9:9, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And I want to say hi to people in the chat, Emil and Timothy, howdy, and Patrick Alexander. Great to see you guys. So Genesis 22:15-18 on Abraham says, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. Of course, that has happened. Numbers 24:17 says, I see him, but not now. I hold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. Of course, that's Jesus. Isaiah 11:1-5 points out where the lineage is for Jesus. It says, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. Now let's note that Jesse is King David's father. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord. He will delight in the fear of the Lord. Now, some people look at that and they say, oh my gosh, why should we fear the Lord? The fear of the Lord, the idea behind that is to be in reverence of the Lord and in obedience to the Lord and to understand and be awestruck by him. That's one of the reasons why when people go into those really fascinating churches, especially located a lot of times in Europe, you get awestruck. That feeling of awe is something that kind of equates to the feeling that you would get when we're one day in front of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips, he will slay the wicked. Okay. Righteousness will be his belt and faithfulness, the sash around his waist. Okay. And so that's speaking towards more of the powerful Messiah type. Jeremiah 23:5-6 says, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved and Israel will live in safety. During the Pax Romana is when Jesus came. Note that there was peace in the Roman Empire at that point. This is the name by which he will be called, the Lord, our righteous Savior. So I'm going to go ahead and say it's good to see you guys, Doki Doki Bible Club and Timothy and Patrick Alexander. Great to see everybody, and Emil. So during Jesus' time, the wealthy were exalted and considered blessed by God, but the poor and weak were considered cursed. Jesus turned that around. He exalted the humble, the weak, the sinners, the women, and the poor. And much of this was predicted in Isaiah 61. Isaiah 61 is the verse that Jesus stood up himself and read to people in the temple and talked about how this has been fulfilled, he said, after he finished Isaiah 61. It was what he was doing. In Psalm 37:11, it says, but the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. And Matthew 20:16, so the last will be first and the first will be last. And then Matthew 5:5, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, meekness is not weakness, but restrained power. That's what a former pastor of mine used to say. Meekness is not weakness, but restrained power. So Jesus was our exemplar. 2 Samuel 7:12-13 on David. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Again, we are in these times that Jesus is reigning in the Messianic era. Psalm 110:4, the order of Melchizedek. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Of course, that's Jesus. Now, Melchizedek is a very interesting character from the Old Testament. He's in Genesis 14. He was the king of Salem, which is what we believe is modern day Jerusalem. And he went and blessed Abraham, and Abraham gave him a tenth of the proceeds from one of the conquerors that he had done. So he gave him, he considered Melchizedek a worthy person to receive that. He was a priest forever. Melchizedek does not have a bloodline. Okay, so Melchizedek, we don't have mention of whose his parents are. We don't know about who his kids were. We don't really know much about Melchizedek at all, except for the way Hebrews expands on this quite a bit. The author of Hebrews tells us a lot about Melchizedek. The name Melchizedek means my righteous king, literally, and figuratively, as mentioned in the Hebrews, it's the righteous one. Very similar and representative of Jesus. Isaiah 7:14, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel, or God with us. Very interesting. Isaiah 9:6, for unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Now, some people try to make the argument that the virgin in Isaiah 14 is from this word Alma, that's a young woman, not necessarily a virgin. However, in ancient Jewish culture, the assumption would be that a young woman in Jewish culture would be a virgin, because one of the things about a young woman in Jewish culture is you were very much scourged for having sex prior to marriage. It was something that was very much very important to ancient Jews. Now, the Babylonians and the Medes enjoyed a decisive victory over the Assyrians in 609 BC. And then, under King Nebuchadnezzar, they captured Judah in 605 BC. Now, here's what's interesting. According to the prophet Jeremiah in 25:11, the whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. So here's what's interesting. There's a couple of different 70-year cycles here. There's one cycle that goes from the time when the Babylonians and the Medes were victorious over the Assyrians who had been ruling in the land in 609. About 70 years later, Cyrus, God moved the heart of Cyrus in Ezra 1:1, who allowed the Jews to return to their homeland. In fact, the name of Cyrus appears in the book of Isaiah as a reference to this. And Isaiah was written decades before we even knew about Cyrus. So right around 539 or 538, God again moved the heart of Cyrus, 70 years after this big victory. And also 70 years after the Jews were exiled and the temple was destroyed. So some Jews were exiled earlier, but some were exiled in 586 when the first temple of Solomon was destroyed. About 70 years later, they built the second temple between 516 and 515. Daniel 2. So the prophet in Daniel 2 correctly interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream about 4 kingdoms in his time. Now, Daniel, as you'll recall, Daniel wrote sometime between around sometime around 605, between 605 and 530, sometime around those years. Okay. And so Daniel correctly interpreted his dream about 4 kingdoms. He talked about the gold, Babylon, silver, Medo-Persia. Of course, Cyrus and Darius were co-regents. Copper and bronze in Greece, and iron in Rome. And of course, the anointed one was supposed to come in the 4th kingdom, which of course was fulfilled when Jesus came. He also correctly interpreted the writing on the wall that King Belshazzar saw the same night he was conquered by Cyrus, the Persian. The writing on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. You have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Now, what's interesting is the only other time that we see God write is when Jesus wrote something in the sand. We don't know what he wrote in the sand, but when he encountered the woman adulterer and Jewish people wanted to stone her, he said, let he who is out without sin throw the first stone, after he wrote something in the sand. Now, we can all speculate on what he wrote in the sand, but the interesting thing is I was thinking to myself, I wonder if he wrote something like, you've been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Pretty interesting stuff. So another thing that we have from Daniel 9, the 77s. Okay, so 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Okay, so it says, know and understand this. This is the angel Gabriel explaining to Daniel after Daniel had said prayers. He wanted to understand what was going on, said some prayers, and the angel Gabriel appeared to him and said, know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now, of course, this is directly predicting that the sanctuary is going to be destroyed and the city. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Now, right around 285 AD, a Jesus hater, person called Porphyry, decided that this must be something that was talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, and the person who did something pretty awful to the temple in 165. So he determined that 165 BC, he determined that that must have been when the book of Daniel was written, and he asserted this. And of course, he was thrown out of the church. They considered this hugely heretical. And so anyway, I digress. I don't think that that's what this is talking about. I think it's talking about a combination of also what's going to happen in our end times. According to the Jews for Jesus, 77 of years equals a period of 490 years, which is 70 times 7. A 490-year period was decreed for the accomplishment of the final restoration of Israel. The Jews for Jesus link of the purposes of the 77s is as follows: to finish transgression, you can compare that with Isaiah 59:20, to make an end of sins, compare that with Isaiah 27:9 and Ezekiel 36:25-27, and Jeremiah 31:31-34, to make reconciliation or atonement for iniquity, to bring an everlasting righteousness, compare that with Isaiah 1:26, 11:2-5, 32:17. And then Jeremiah 23:33, to seal up a vision and prophecy and to anoint a most holy place, the Jewish temple. Again, compare that with Ezekiel 40-48. Now, there's 4 different options for when this call went out. And the Jews for Jesus believe that right around 444 BC, with a decree with Artaxerxes, that was the one that they feel is the most likely. And if you take that and you look at the 483-year period, it's going to lead you right up to the Passion Week. So Nehemiah 12:27 says, at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, the Levites were sought out from where they lived and were brought to Jerusalem to celebrate joyfully the dedication with songs of thanksgiving and with the music of cymbals, harps, and lyres. So Malachi 3:1. Now here's a pretty important point to think about. The second temple, as I mentioned before, was built right around 516 or 515 before Christ, and it was completely annihilated by the Romans in the year 70. But here's what Malachi said during the time of the Second Temple. Malachi is supposed to be written about 400 years before Christ. It says, I will send my messenger who will prepare the way for me. Then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. The messenger of the covenant, whom you desire, will come, says the Lord Almighty. So we know that the Messiah had to appear prior to 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. Zechariah 3:8 says, listen, high priest Joshua, you and your associates seated before you, who are men symbolic of the things to come. I am going to bring my servant, the branch. So Isaiah 42:6-7 says, I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand. I will keep you and make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles, to open the eyes that are blind, to free captives from prison, and to release from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. And of course, Jesus did fulfill that. The prison, we were held prison to our sins, and Jesus freed us from prison to our sins, to be imprisoned and during the period before he resurrected, after he was crucified. And so notice this, a light to a Gentiles. It's fascinating because a lot of the Hebrew translation says a light for the nations, and nations and Gentiles is in a Hebrew word that's interchangeable. But there is a little bit of a distinction here, because nations would include Jews and Gentiles, but Gentiles is saying, no, this is just the Gentiles, the non-Jews. So in other translations, English translations, the word that they use is translated to Gentiles. Isaiah 35:4-6, behold, your God will come with vengeance, with the recompense of God. He shall come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. One of the reasons why Jesus had people tell John the Baptist, who was in prison under King Herod. John the Baptist was in prison, and he was just wondering about his position, and he was wondering about Jesus. And Jesus said, let them know I've cured the blind. And he mentioned other healing instances that he was doing. Zechariah 12:10, and I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. And then, of course, Psalm 22:12-16. Many bulls encompass me. Strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. Now, what would make his bones be out of joint? Hanging from a cross. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. Of course, he's also very thirsty, laying up there. And you lay me in the dust of death, for dogs encompass me, a company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Now again, take note of this. This was written hundreds of years. Psalm was written again by David. King David wrote most of the Psalms, but the Psalms were written around 1,000 years before Christ and hundreds of years before the Persians had even invented crucifixion as a means of persecution. So he was very wise to notice, they have pierced my hands and feet. The pierced translation you can find in a lot of English translations. You can also find it in the Septuagint. Some Jewish translations, some Hebrew translations say, like a lion, my hands and feet, but that really doesn't make much sense. But as Dr. Michael Brown has pointed out, lions don't lick your hands and feet. What lions would do to your hands and feet? They dug a hole, bore a hole. Okay. So Psalm 31:5 says, into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. Now, here's another one. Just like Psalm 22, Jesus called our attention to Psalm 22 when he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Jesus also, in his final words on the cross, called our attention to this one. He says, into your hand I commit my spirit. He's calling our attention to Psalm 31:11-12. Because all my adversaries I have become a reproach, especially to my neighbors, and an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the street flee from me. I've been forgotten like one who is dead. Now, Psalm 31, again, it makes reference to what the early apostles did. You'll recall that at the foot of the cross, we only saw the beloved apostle, John, and who's the son of Zebedee, brother of James. We only saw him. He's the only male at the foot of the cross. The male apostles were gone. So the females were there. Mother Mary was there, and John was there. And the interesting thing is all the other ones had gone into hiding because they did not want to face the same sort of crucifixion that Jesus faced. In fact, Peter denied him 3 times. And so they were in hiding, and they stayed in hiding until Jesus appeared to them. So while I'm over here, I want to say hi to the chat here. I see Doki Doki Bible Club, Kip Davis, Digital Hammurabi, and I see some comments here. Slam RN, my good friend Slam, she's here too. And so welcome everybody. It's good to see you. And so here we go. So there's Jesus on the cross next to the 2 criminals. One of the criminals recognized his own inferiority relative to Jesus, and Jesus said that they would both be in heaven, in paradise. Here's Isaiah 52:13-15. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were told they will see, and what they have not heard they will understand. I should also mention, as far as the pierced translation, that goes back to a word that appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that's been verified by people who didn't really have a reason to necessarily pick the either Karu or Kuri. Okay, so that's just something to note. The Dead Sea Scrolls found that the original word can be translated as pierced or dug, like dug hole. So who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. Now, I have read this verse to atheists before who've recognized right away that that's Jesus and assumed that this was written in the New Testament. And a pastor on a plane drew my attention to this verse, and I couldn't believe when I found it in the Hebrew text. I couldn't believe that Hebrew people don't know about this verse. But I have to say, a couple of my Jewish friends, I've drawn their attention to this verse, and they don't know, they didn't really know how to respond to it. So it's really interesting. So he was pierced for our transgressions, and like a sheep, we have gone astray. We have turned everyone into his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Now, in the Masoretic Dead Sea Scrolls, Isaiah 53:11, it says, "But he shall see the light." Some English translations say that. In fact, the NIV says, "He shall see the light of life," right? A direct reference to resurrection. Of course, there he is, Christ the Redeemer. He redeems, he loves, he serves. He came to serve others. He loves you, all of you who are in the chat. Even if you don't love him back, he still loves you. So I want to say hi also to Sal and say hi to other people. So uh, it's strange that Kip Davis says, no, the Hebrew word cannot be translated as pierced. Well, it is translated as pierced. I'm sorry, Kip, you're going up against a number of different scholars. Look at all of the people involved in the ESV, the NIV, all the people who've translated it as pierced, and Kip Davis is saying that that's not possible. Well, I'm sorry, other scholars have said it is possible, and they've done that. So prophecies of the end times, this is what's really interesting. Some of the stuff that we were expecting about the end times. No, I didn't block Jim Majors. He's not been blocked. Or did I block Jim Majors? Oh, you know what? I think Susan might have blocked Jim Majors. I'll have to check, and I can unblock him. Is he trying to get in the chat? I will check. In fact, I can't really do that while I'm running this episode, but I don't see Jim Majors in here. So anyway, if he's trying to get in, let me know. Digital Ham, I'll take a second to switch over and see if I can find his thing and unblock him. So Matthew 24:14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So we believe as Christians that we are in the end times. Oh, I want to say hi to Veckel too, and Janet Duttridge, and everybody in the thing. So good to see you guys. We believe we're in the end times right now. We believe that the end times, I believe people believe they were in the end times 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 600 years ago. We're all in the same generation. We're in the messianic generation. Okay, so we're in the same generation as the people of the first century. 2 Peter 2:1-3. So I'm just pointing to a few things that I've noticed going on in society today. Oh, good. So Slam has not blocked him, so he can come in. Perfect. Thank you, Susan. Okay, so first, 2 Peter 2:1-3. But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who brought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction, and many will follow their sensuality, and because of them the way, the truth, will be blasphemed. And in their greed they will exploit you with false words. Their condemnation from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. Okay, so that is just something to watch out for. One of the things that's a very destructive heresy that's going on right now is universalism. Some people believe that everybody's going to be reconciled to God, even if they're preaching out against him and hating on him while on this earth. And they have this belief because they think that's an ideal sort of belief. Even Hitler will go to heaven, according to this heresy, in this particular interpretation of universalism, which is this universal reconciliation of everyone despite what they do and whether or not they have faith. And so that's something I find rather reckless, because it's not supported in the Bible very well at all. In fact, there's all kinds of references to things in the Bible, especially in Revelation 20 and 21. 2 Timothy 3, 1-7 said this, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving God, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. Avoid such people, for among them are those who creep into households and capture weak women, burdened with sins and led astray by various passions, always learning and never able to arrive at a knowledge of the truth. So, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Just something to think about. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Veckel, a lot of times you've come in the chat here. Any evidence, Sal, if you guys are interested in chatting some more today, I do have a little bit of time. And actually some others, if others here, so we can chat. Okay, so let's see what else we have for the end times. So 1 Timothy 4-1 also said something really interesting, 4:1-4. Now the Spirit expressly says that in later times some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons, through the insincerity of liars whose consciences are seared, who forbid marriage and require abstinence from foods that God created, to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is made holy by the word of God and prayer. Sadly, the Catholic Church falls into some of this, okay? The Catholic Church forbids nuns, priests, bishops, archbishops, a lot of other people to get married. For 1 Timothy 4, it goes right against the Catholic Church. Okay, the Catholic Church also requires abstinence from food. On Good Friday, for example, you're not allowed to eat meat. You can only eat fish. You can't eat other kinds of meat. And so that is something that the Catholic Church is doing that went completely away. All right, so that's just not a good deal. So let me see if I can bring Sal in here. Let me just get back to my other screen for a second here. Aha. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and, well, actually, you know what, Sal? Let me go ahead and just finish this off because I've just got a couple more slides left, and then I'll come back and share a link. So Psalm 96:5 in the Septuagint is 95:5. It's really interesting because this word says, for all the gods of the heathen are blank. Okay, so in Septuagint, it says devils. And in the many other translations, it says idols. And so I found that just really fascinating. Devils versus idols. And apparently Jerome, when translating the Vulgate into Latin, decided to take the Greek word, which refers to either devils or demons, which is interesting. Now, 1 Corinthians 10:12, St. Paul has something kind of similar to say. He says, no, I imply that what pagan sacrifice they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons. So it's just something to note. There is a spiritual battle going on in the world. And Psalm 82, Michael Heiser has drawn a lot of our attention to that. Also, some other things that we expect to see in the end times. So Luke 21 says, 6-13 says, as for these things that you see, the days will come when there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. And they asked him, teacher, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? And he said, see that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name saying, I am he, and the time is at hand. Do not go after them. And when you hear of wars and tumults, do not be terrified, for these things must first take place, but the end will not be at once. So my point is, I agree with him. I think there's a lot of people standing out on the street corners saying, hey, right now it's the end. The world's gonna end in 2025 or whatever they say. Don't pay any attention to that because we don't know exactly when the world is going to end. It could be now, could be 10 days from now, it could be 100 years from now, or far beyond that. You don't know. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake. This will be your opportunity to bear witness. Of course, you do remember probably the fate of St. Stephen, who was stoned. That's mentioned in Acts. James, also the brother of John and son of Zebedee, he also was martyred, as mentioned in the book of Acts. Peter is believed to have been crucified upside down. Tradition says that, documented again by some early church fathers. Paul is believed to have been beheaded under Nero. Okay, so we also saw that. And then a lot of church tradition talks about a number of other apostles who were martyred in really gory ways. So Jesus had told that. Now we also see in Luke 21 right here, Jesus prophesied the fall of the temple, which is why some atheists and agnostics try to posit that the books were written after the year 70. Because of course they know that the temple fell in the year 70. However, a lot of evidence, especially with Peter and Paul, points to much earlier dating. Since Peter and Paul are said to have been martyred right around the early 60s, and then they're not mentioned in the book of Acts, which was written by Luke. The fact that he didn't mention the two stars and their martyrdom, but he did mention Stephen and James, makes me think that perhaps he wrote it before Peter and Paul were martyred. Okay, so that's just something. And Matthew 24:34, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. So again, we are still in the messianic generation. Now here's some stuff that we expect to come. We expect an abomination of desolation is going to appear in the temple of Jerusalem in the final of the 70 weeks, from Daniel 9:24-27, 11:31, 12:11, and 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4, and Revelation 13. We also note that Israel was resurrected 1878 years after its destruction in 1948. The Temple Institute, here's what's interesting. In Israel right now, there's this group called the Temple Institute. Here's a quote, it's an organization in Israel focusing on the endeavor of establishing the third temple. Its long-term aims are to build the third Jewish temple on the Temple Mount, on the site occupied by the Dome of the Rock, which is a Muslim temple, and to reinstate animal sacrificial worship. Okay, so it's really speaking to some of the stuff that is in the Bible. So also it's mentioned in Daniel and other places, the Antichrist is going to set up an image of himself so he can be worshipped in the place of God, and he will have what appears to be a mortal wound, that he somehow survived some sort of mortal wound. And he's going to be destroyed. It's also prophesied. And Daniel 9:27, here's what it said. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And for half the week, he shall be put an end to sacrifice and offering. Okay, so this idea, this Temple Institute's thinking about doing sacrificial offerings. This Antichrist is going to end that until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Also, Luke 21:25-26. And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth, distress of nations and perplexity, because of the roaring of the sea and the waves, people fainting with fear and with foreboding of what is coming on the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. So the implication here is that the weather is going to get pretty bad. And then there's kind of a one world government implication here in Revelation 13:7-8. And it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given over every tribe and people and language and nation. So this is implying a one world government. Now, what do we see in modern times? Well, we see the World Economic Forum and its Great Reset. Okay, so what they're doing is trying to capitalize off COVID and also off climate change initiatives to sort of be the leader, in this way, a global leader in climate change, and to, of course, scurry up some power. So here's what they say. As we enter a unique window of opportunity to shape the recovery, this initiative will offer insights to help inform all those determining the future state of global relations, the direction of national economies, the priorities of societies, the nature of business models, and the management of a global commons. Okay, see that? Underline that. Management of a global commons. Drawing from the vision and vast expertise of the leaders engaged across the forum's communities, the Great Reset Initiative has a set of dimensions to build a new social contract that honors the dignity of every human being. Now, the people who run this are extremely wealthy. The least expensive option to be a member is around $60,000 a year. $60,000 a year. It's very expensive to be part of this group. These are, of course, people who think themselves as gods, people who are at the upper echelon of society, the billionaires. Okay, so this is speaking to them, and this is looking at what they're coming up with. Now, here's another really interesting thing that you might not know about China's plan for world domination. So here, this is a quote from John Malden in Forbes, which I found. It says, in the 100-year marathon, Michael Pillsbury marshals a lot of evidence showing the Chinese government has a detailed strategy to overtake the U.S. as the world's dominant power. They want to do this by 2049, the centennial of China's communist revolution. Now, you notice that China already is encroaching on places like Hong Kong. They're encroaching down in Australia, from what I understand as well. China does have these plans. Now, they want to overtake the U.S. They want to be dominant. Of course, China's run by a communist government. They have opened up free markets in some ways, but it's they say they're communist. They believe in authority, hierarchical authority. Here's what Revelation 13:16-18 says. Also, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the name of the beast, or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Very scary stuff. Now, this goes back to years ago, when I looked at this sort of thing. If you go back, you can look at like Damien Omen, very scary movie. This little kid's born with 666 printed up on his hair. Super scary, freaky movie. But the other scary thing is Nero was sort of like a precursor to the Antichrist, because apparently Nero's name does add up to 666. So here's what China is doing. China has a surveillance system to spy on its citizens, 4 times as many cameras as are in the United States. And here's what they do to take that even to another level. Based on what they see in the surveillance, they give social credit points to restrict travel. Okay, so here's what it says. Nicole Kobe said this. China's social credit system expands the idea that to all aspects of life, judging citizens' behavior and trustworthiness. Caught jaywalking, don't pay a court bill, play your music too loud on the train, you could lose certain rights, such as booking a flight or a train ticket. Marieke Olberg says the idea itself is not a Chinese phenomenon. She's a research associate at the Mercator Institute for China Studies, nor is the use and abuse of aggregated data for analysis of behavior. But if the China system does come together as envisioned, it would still be something very unique. It's both unique and part of a global trend. Okay, so scary, scary stuff. Okay, that ends my little presentation. So I'm going to open this up because I'm very brave. And I'm going to, I know that, wait, how do I find it? Open up, hold on. Okay, so I'm going to open this up and see who wants to come in here. Hopefully I'll get people who are friendly. Here we go. Okay. So that is the link. So I'm showing it right there. And what I do want to talk about, though, again, is I want to talk about the topics sort of that we're talking about today, if you don't mind. So that would be ideal. Oh, thank you, Doki Doki Bible Club. Bought a super sticker. So very, very kind. Oh, I got Nathan here. Wait, hold on. I'm trying to cancel something. Ah, okay. Hi, Nathan.
Hey, SJ. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I got Sal here too. Let's see. Hi, Sal. I don't know if Sal, you've got your thing on mute, but I can see you. So here we go.
Greetings.
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 So
I got to meet David Giesler this morning and also last night. He's the son of Norman Giesler.
Oh.
And yeah, so I paid tribute to the work of Norman Giesler, and I couldn't believe all the people that he influenced in the 20th century in the area of apologetics. So kind of put me in a good mood, and I just wanted to convey that to you. There's going to be a movie coming out, Not Qualified, that talks about his work. And I think a lot of what you were sharing today, these were things that were being advanced in the 20th century in favor of arguing for evidences of Christ. So that's about all I had to say. I didn't really have much to say about anything you said today. So I just wanted to pass that on and at least drop by and say hi, SJ.
Oh, no, that's great. So are you talking about the prophecies, the Old Testament prophecies? Or are you thinking about the end time stuff, or what were you thinking about?
Well, the simplest prophecy for me personally, there are two of them. In the Old Testament, Michael Brown gave the summary. He said the Jewish Messiah would teach the Gentiles about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then in general, there's a summary in the New Testament that said, in him the Gentiles will hope. And Dr. Michael Brown said, can you name one Jew that has done more to bring awareness about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the Hebrew scriptures than Jesus Christ? That's one. And then Gamaliel in Acts chapter 5, he said, if this is of God, you can't stop it. And I said, if you think about that, that was pretty bold to say that when he's trying to squish this, relatively small movement. And he said, if this is of God, you're not going to stop it. He said, look at all these false messiahs who went out in the desert and died. We're gone and forgotten. Why is this carpenter's son that had no political office, didn't command mighty armies, had no degrees, probably didn't travel very far? Why is this one has changed so much of human history and Western culture? And
we're talking about Mormonism?
No, I was talking about Christianity.
Oh, sorry. I just got confused.
Nathan, I don't know about that.
Those are the two big prophecies for me that are rather undeniable. And so I didn't get quite into the specifics as you did, SJ, but to me, those are big testimonies. And D. James Kennedy said, I can hardly think of any bigger miracle than, some obscure peasant in human history having such an effect. And there's kind of an apocryphal tract that it's attributed, but I think it's an interpolation, but it still says it right. He said, condemned to after he lost the Battle of Waterloo, he said, so few people would die for me, but millions would die for Christ this very moment, and he's reflecting on his failure as a world leader. He said, look at this, where I am now. Hardly anyone will die for me, but millions to this day would be willing to die for Jesus Christ. He said, there's no one in history like that.
Yeah, that's actually kind of speaking to blend what you just said with what Nathan said, that there was another prophecy that Jesus, that we have in the New Testament is in Galatians 1:8, where Jesus proactively debunked Mormonism and the Muslim faith, by saying that if an angel should appear to you, you're supposed to not believe that person. If a person claims an angel appeared to him, that we're not supposed to take that person seriously. We're supposed to write them off immediately in Galatians 1:8. And so the idea is the Mormons, you had Joseph Smith claiming that the angel Moroni appeared to him, and you have Muhammad claiming that the angel Gabriel appeared to him. And so it was, again, debunked in Galatians 1:8.
Mary as well then, right?
No, because it says that it's talking about the doctrines that we already practiced in Galatians. It says, let me give you the exact quote. I'll give you because angels appeared all the time in the Old Testament, and in the Old Testament, and then of course appeared to Mary, and also appeared to Mary's cousin Elizabeth. So angels did appear in there, but this is saying, as of this point, as of the writing, what they're teaching now, the gospel, the good news, if there's something that goes beyond that, Revelation tells us not to go and write anything more than what's in there. That was the last final word. But Galatians says that you're not supposed to believe people if they claim this with a new belief system.
Like Christianity.
So there were some things also
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So you're also mentioning about some things in the end times, and it always struck me that in Christianity, Jesus and the apostles were predicting some pretty dire things that are going to happen in the world, and it's becoming more and more apparent on many levels humanity is not going to survive. So the general prophecy that this world and all its desires are passing, that's becoming very apparent now on many levels. I mean, at the basal level, there's finite life to the solar system. There's finite amounts of natural resources. And so as the population is expanding, I don't see how we're going to avoid conflict because the pressure to just keep, countries just wanting to grab more and more power as their technology develops and as the amount of available natural resources contracts. And then we have all these nut jobs that are trying to get nuclear weapons. That's also telling me the desire to avoid nuclear war will drive the eventual formation of a one world government. And plus our economies are becoming deeply integrated. So these are prophecies that are coming true. It's very sobering. And even if one is not a Christian, I've asked atheist friends, I said, how long do you think the human race is going to live? And they all, I'm like, are you optimistic? I'll just say, you tell me, are you optimistic about the prospects of humanity? And a lot of them will say no. And that gives us a different way to kind of consider our lives and the meaning of everything we're doing if humanity's not going to last very long.
Yeah, it's
and
scary.
And so what I've said is there are no answers in atheism. I mean, as it says in 1 Corinthians, let us, if Christ is not raised, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. And I've not heard anything better than that from the atheists. There are no answers in atheism.
Do you think it would be better in that situation to have, like, how would you rank, say, having a true belief, a false belief, and no belief at all about something? Like, which one of those do you think is the best?
Believing in what's true is the best.
And then what do you think the second best is? Like a false belief or no belief at all about something?
I don't have an opinion.
Okay.
I think that, I mean, the idea with Christianity is Christianity itself is the truth. And so, but I thought, Nathan, you had come to be a Christian. You were coming to Christianity. And now it sounds like with everything you're saying today, you sound very negative towards Christianity and towards us in general here in this conversation.
Yeah, I think I understand that the things you were describing are part of what you believe, but I think there are a lot of inconsistencies and tensions in like, for example, as you articulate some of these things, you're making like steps of reasoning right along the way, and I just think a lot of those are unwarranted. So say, for example, if China didn't start World War III for 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years, I mean, how long would that have to happen for before you would abandon the belief that China was actually going to be participating in causing these like end times wars? I mean, I mean, if you were a medieval person, for example, it's kind of like a pessimistic induction argument. If you were, I don't know, a medieval person and you saw the rise of the Ottoman Empire or whatever, or I don't know, if you were in the 1900s and you saw Germany industrializing or whatever, you might be starting to think, oh, this war's coming, and this is actually this is the end times, right? I don't think you'd be very optimistic about a lot of things. And yet you'd say that the people like the Christian denominations, like the Millerites, for example, who have made various predictions about the end times coming, or the Jehovah's Witnesses, who are another spin-off group, that actually they weren't correct when they said that this is like Judgment Day coming, this event. And then they say, oh, no, it was just actually what happened is Jesus is now sitting at the right hand of the Father. That's what happened. Like there's quite a large precedent for this, I think, with when religious people try and attribute
See, that's what I don't know if you heard the part what I said. I made it pretty clear that I said I'm not saying that the end times are today. I'm not saying that they're 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now. I made it really clear that Jesus said nobody knows that. No one knows that. So we could say, just look at the signs, look at like what China's doing, but maybe it's going to all go to pass, what China's doing.
But
maybe
I
nothing,
suppose
maybe the one world government, maybe it's not going to come out of China. My point is that we're not saying China is definitely going to be a contributor to the abomination of desolation. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that.
But why
we should look at
spend
the
10 minutes though, like talking specifically about China then? Why not spend 10 minutes talking about the big economic factors in 700s Europe, right, that could have potentially been candidates for the end times? I mean, aren't they core to what a Christian should be talking about? Why not just leave it at well, we believe the end time's coming? Why does it have to be like tethered to current events that aren't? It's not confirmed whether they are.
Because I think you. Because listen, I think that people are crazy if you don't pay attention to what's going on in the world right now. You have to pay attention to what's going on in China right now. This is a very serious thing that China is doing. And China is encroaching on a number of other countries. It's even if it has nothing to do with the end times, we do need to pay attention to China. So I that up because a lot of what China's doing is kind of similar to what we see in Revelation.
I agree, but I don't think it's a helpful heuristic for resolving the problem to think about it in terms of like the end times confirmation, when there's no way of us telling either way whether it's associated. And I don't think that that's going to help to reach a solution that's viable economically or politically or environmentally, for example. And I think I agree with you that all those things are really important, but I don't think they're important because potentially the world's going to come to an end and Jesus is going to return. I think they're important just as they stand.
Yeah, I agree. They're important just as they stand. So yeah. I'm sorry, Sal.
I wanted to say one thing that had concerned me is the prophecies of famine and pestilence and diseases. I've had contact with epidemiologists. There is a lot of concern. And then sadly, we're now at the stage where humans can introduce a lot of genetic changes in bioterror weapons. And also comparably disconcerting is the chance that we could have accidental leaks of experiments going wrong. I'm actually surprised that we haven't had more disasters, given all the kind of the loose controls in some of our genetic engineering processes. We don't know what sort of Frankenstein things we're building. And sometimes I've thought, when I have heard those prophecies about famines and pestilences, I said, wouldn't that be the irony if part of that is kind of man-made, that we're creating, God foresaw kind of the apocalypse of in terms of pestilence, and a component of that is man-made. And I've actually, some of us have been concerned. It's like, what if someone's just kind of tinkering because it's becoming easier and easier to change genomes? And what if someone's tinkering and they just kind of let it go down the drain and it emerges somewhere because, you don't know how it could just fester somewhere and then just spread to wherever. So I've been concerned about the pestilences, and I've been monitoring what, on occasion, not intensely, but the concerns of people like who are trying to manage or monitor the spread of diseases around the world. And I'm very concerned. So that prophecy does literally have a chance of emerging. But on another note, as I was saying, as we're thinking about all the terrible things that could happen to us, that it puts a spin on, it puts a different perspective on things, because atheism tends to prosper in times of prosperity. People tend to be a little bit more circumspect and start seeking after God when things are kind of terrible. And just contemplating all of the prophecies that could happen, even if one is not a Christian, but just contemplating the possibilities of famines and pestilences, it should be sobering enough to make people turn to the Lord. That's certainly the case in my life as I thought about what our prospects were. Because I remember a computer science professor saying, there's this book, Limits of Growth, and he said you could try putting in the parameters, and they're trying to estimate, when are we going to run out of whatever. And we have to count sometimes on a miracle to help us for some new technology, but that's not very comforting that we can see the limits of growth. They might be hit, and there would be famines in that case. Just the depletion of natural resources, or even something as basic as land to be able to grow enough food. So
one sad thing, that just to piggyback on what you're saying a little bit, is one of the sad things is some people might use that to justify abortion. And so I can say one of the egregious activities that we haven't seen, most countries did not, they outlawed abortion going about 50 years ago. And so now we're seeing many countries opening up the idea of abortion and millions of babies perishing. And some people trying to justify that by saying we need to control the population. But the problem that is related to that Thomas Sowell pointed out, he said sometimes when people, if the population gets bigger, there's also maybe some great scientists in that larger population who could contribute to solving some of the technological problems we have. And so I look at the 60 million babies in the United States that were lost to abortion since 1973. And we could have, maybe among those 60 million, there could have been some really amazing people who could have made a huge impact on the environment and the world.
Thomas Sowell's one of my favorite economists, so thanks for mentioning him.
Yeah, I love Thomas Sowell. I had a gentleman on my channel last week, Javier, who's an atheist, he's the rare conservative atheist, like super conservative, loves Thomas Sowell. But then we were talking about Thomas Sowell a lot last week. It was really actually quite an enjoyable conversation. So I'm gonna invite him back on soon.
I did like your response to Kip. I mean, because he sounds obviously very knowledgeable, but you said, well, that is the translation, pierced, and it's several scholars. I was like, I never thought to respond that way. I mean, how do the Jewish rabbis interpret that passage, translate it to English? Is it pierced?
It depends. See, there's two. I looked at Michael Brown's information on that. Michael Brown is very learned in Judaism because he, of course, was raised in a Jewish family, and he's educated himself in Hebrew and the languages. And he said that there apparently in the verse in Psalm 22:16, in the verse there's kari and karu. There's these two different words. Okay, one means the one means dug or pierced, and it's translated as dug or pierced. And the other one means like a lion. It's more like a lion. And so apparently, if you go back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, according to Michael Brown, and also according to what I could find online, the word for dug or pierced is what's there. And the Dead Sea Scrolls are older than they were around before Jesus. And the Masoretes, in sometime between the 6th century, 500 years and about 1,000 or 500 and maybe 900 years after Jesus walked the earth, they translated the Jewish books, and they translated the word into what's translated as like a lion. And there's this one little letter that's kind of thrown off there. And so now I see Dr. Kip is actually in the chat, who probably wants to offer his opinion on this, Sal. So let's let him in. He hasn't been on my channel before, but he's been very active in the chats lately.
Hi, SJ.
Hello,
And
Dr. Kip.
Nathan, it's good to see you, and Sal.
Hey.
So, are you interested in? I mean, we can talk through this issue of Psalm 22 if you want. You want to talk through that?
You can actually, if you want to share your opinion, that's fine on Psalm 22. So why
Sure.
don't you go ahead and lay it out?
Could I share my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay. I will show a couple of things here. Just make sure I get that. There we go. Just do that. Okay. Is that working?
Oh, you know what? It's over here. Let me just see if I can pop it into there. Okay.
There we go. Okay. So, I mean, I'll show this. This is from a presentation I gave on the Myth Vision podcast channel about this passage. So and actually before I start there, let's go. You showed. I probably don't even need to show that. You showed a picture of the fragment in question from the Dead Sea Scrolls that appears to have the word Keru. It's pronounced Keru. It appears to have that word in the psalm. Now, the problem with this passage is twofold. As you can see on my screen here, the word Keru is spelt like this: Kof, Resh, Vav. That's the verbal form of Keru, which would mean they dug. The word that appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls fragment is Kof, Aleph, Resh, Vav. It, on its own, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything at all. And the scholar who edited this scroll was actually a teacher of mine named Professor Peter Flint. He was a very lovely man, but also someone who was very, very deeply committed to what he believed. And he rendered, I think the reading is probably correct, Kof, Aleph, Resh, Vav, but he interpreted that as an original reading, and then suggested that it's a lengthened form of the verb keru, which would be very, very unusual, and then went on to translate that, or at least went on to show that that's essentially what's going on in the Septuagint. The Septuagint read this Hebrew text, or a Hebrew text like this, and then applied the same word, which does not mean pierced. It doesn't mean pierced, SJ. Even if it is keru, it means dug. And there's a whole list of passages here on my screen where this word occurs, and in every single instance, it does not mean pierced. Now, I'm going to say something else here. One of the reasons to be fairly suspect about what Peter Flint was doing with this passage is when we look at this other fragment, which comes from 4Q Psalms F, dates to about 150 BC, and it preserves the same passage. And he reconstructed here the passage to read Kof, Resh, Vav, Keru, as it would appear if it was the actual verb. The problem here is that, can you guys see my cursor?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can.
Okay, so here I'm pointing to the traces that he transcribed as Kof and Resh. It's this little dot here and this little dot here. That's it. We don't know what's there. We have no idea what's there. and yet he went ahead and provided this reading and this note. This manuscript may well have had the grammatically correct reading Keru, which is I would disagree with. Sorry, no, yeah, this is the reading from the other fragment, but he lists this fragment as well as agreeing with his reading. So
wait, can I just get clarification here for a second? Okay, so you're saying that your advisor, Dr. Flint, took another Dead Sea Scroll manuscript and interpreted it in a way that you disagree with?
Not just that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. He didn't just interpret it. Well, yeah, he interpreted it in a way that I disagree with, but he was reading letters where there are no letters.
That was what he was interpreting, what we just saw, SJ. That was literally the fragment where the letters weren't there. Yeah.
There's nothing there, and he was reading letters where there weren't letters. So but this is all a bit of an aside from the much more serious issue that Kof Aleph Resh Vav, as it appears in the Nachal Hever Psalm, which is how you pronounce it, in the Nachal Hever Psalm, that Kof Aleph Resh Vav, it doesn't mean anything on its own. It doesn't. It's a meaningless nonsense construction. And beyond that, the word Keru, which it looks like the Septuagint read on a manuscript like this, didn't the translator of the Septuagint didn't know what he was didn't get what he was reading, because it's such it's a meaningless nonsense word, and struggling to figure out what to do with it, decided maybe this means maybe it's this word Keru, which means to dig, not to pierce. That's the issue.
Okay, no, I understand that's your viewpoint, and that's certainly,
it's not my viewpoint, SJ.
No,
this is
what I'm saying is
Keru does not mean pierced. It does not. It does not.
Okay, well, the word is, I'm going to go back to what Dr. Michael Brown said, and so he said that it means to dug a hole or bore a hole. That's what he made. Yeah, and so that's so we're in agreement there.
I don't see where I don't see a single instance where it means bore a hole. It means dug, like digging in the ground. Most of the time, from those passages I provided, the almost all the time it has to do with digging a grave.
Okay, so I don't think we're in disagreement, really. It's the translators, numerous translators have. No, let me just finish what I have to say. So numerous translators have translated that verse as pierced. We can find it through the scholars who've contributed to the a number of different versions of the English translations of the Bible. We can also find it that we see it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, like you mentioned. Dr. Michael Brown thinks the aleph actually just makes it a ka'aru, and so that's his idea with that. And he said it's still the same word. And we also know that the application, obviously people looked at that word and they put the hands and the feet right next to it, and they thought, what would make sense, dug my hands and feet or pierced my hands and feet? And they've changed it to pierced. It's why we see hundreds of different translations saying pierced.
How could it be dug? How could it be dug?
Hold on, Sel.
Just wanted to clarify how it could be dug.
Hold on, Sel. How it could be dug?
Yeah, I mean,
you want to clarify how it could be dug?
Yeah.
Oh, in that passage, I think it's a Scrabble error. The proper reading, it's a Scrabble error. The proper reading of the word is ke'ari, which means like a lion. Somebody, and it's important to note that scribes didn't always read very well. And they weren't necessarily commissioned to to be a great, to be an excellent scribe, you've got to be able to see the letters that you're writing and be able to reproduce them clearly and legibly. So, and the Vav Yod transference is a real thing, and it's a distinct issue that we see in numerous manuscripts where Vavs are confused for Yods, these two letters. So it was a scribal error. Somebody not paying close attention to what he was doing mistranscribed a Yod for a Vav. Somebody else came along and was trying to read this verse and encountered this and went, I have no idea what this means. I can't figure out how to translate this clearly. So I'm going to do the best that I can, and maybe it's a misspelling of this verb.
I like to know what evidence do you have that there's a misspelling, or this is some sort of a scribal error?
because I know how to spell in Hebrew.
Okay, so can you give us some sort of documented evidence that this was a scribal error, and that the word that we see there should have been something else? Like, what word should be there though?
It should have been ke'ari is the word.
I think showing it side by side might be useful if you do have that. I don't.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure,
yeah, because that sounds ridiculous. I mean, when you're digging something, what are you doing? You're piercing. Like, if I want to put a hole in the ground, what am I doing? I'm piercing the ground with a tool.
But it would sound
put a hole in it.
Would you agree though, Vekul, that if say if I was a criminal with a knife, right? I wouldn't say I'm gonna dig a hole in you with this knife, right? You just think probably start laughing or something. You think, well,
yeah, that's fine. That's fine. But we also have to keep in mind too that just because we're looking at this in a completely different language, that we can't just rule out the etymology behind it. They too used poetic language, like metaphors and similes and anthropomorphisms, so on and so forth. And also you see polysemous language in the Hebrew text as well. So you can't just play the semantic game and say, oh, well, that word shouldn't be pure. Well, look, it's fine. I mean, pierce is fine. And also we're looking at it in different English translation. Yes, it is. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it.
So who are the translators who have rendered this to read pierce?
I don't know, but I want to see. I want to see side by side documented evidence that this is the wrong word. I don't care who you know. We show it. You're talking to the little man right now.
I'll do this again.
Side by side evidence that this was an error on it.
Do you think, Vekul, just before he does show this, that if you see it, this will change your mind?
Well, it depends. It depends on the if we're going to practice honest and decent hermeneutics as well. You can't just say, "Oh, that word should be there." And
so if Dr. Kip is being honest, and he shows you,
if he's being honest,
and he shows you this,
he's not going to be able to do it in this short time that I have. I mean, first of all, you have about 400,000 textual variants. So between the different manuscripts that are out there, so he's going to have to show every version of these manuscripts with that particular verse that says and prove that they say something entirely different than what we have in the English text right now. I mean, because I'm just not buying it. Oh, it shouldn't be dig. It shouldn't be pierced. Well, what word should be there then? And what that can change? Would that?
Well, how about Kip talks us through what he's showing then? What he's showing on the screen.
Okay,
so there it is. Ready. Yeah. On the left, you have ka'ari. Okay. On the right, you have Keiru. You can see the change in them is this letter on the left-hand side of each one. This is a vav and a yoda. It's what's called a vav-yod transference, where a scribe mistakes a vav for a yod, which is easy to do. You can see this is just a random fragment I pulled up from the collection of the scrolls, which shows where vavs and yods are very often extremely difficult to discern one from the other.
So which word should be there then in Psalm 22?
It should be this one on the left, ke'ari, which means
what's
like
that word
a
mean?
Lion. Like a lion.
And you know this how do you know that that's the word that should be there?
Well, because that's in the vast majority of Hebrew manuscripts, that's the word that's there.
Can I just also
there is literally 3 out of all the Hebrew manuscripts on the entire earth where this passage is preserved. There are 3 that read it.
Yeah.
And they don't even read it like this. One of them reads it like this. And then there's 2 others that read it without this aleph in the middle.
So let me, because I think you're making your point, and I've already made my points on this. But let Rob come in and counter, and then I've got Dr. Josh also here.
Hey,
stop sharing my screen. Sorry,
Dr. Kip, and hey, Dr. Josh.
Hello,
It's good.
Rob.
Well, big
It's
family
good to
here.
see you both. Yeah. The funny thing is, I've actually been SJ. I've been looking into this last couple of weeks. Funnily enough, I came across 3 papers and quite fascinating. The first thing I want to point out is the New Testament doesn't actually quote the verse. That's the first. And by the way, Dr. Kip, I'm speaking as a Christian as well. So,
Well,
like when you
can
look,
I clarify something?
yeah.
Just quickly here.
Mhm.
I'm not an atheist. I don't believe I'm an atheist. Just so you know. And I have been a Christian for most of my life.
Right. Yeah, and SJ, I'm speaking actually sort of being the middleman here. Like I'll be paraphrasing to the best of my ability what Dr. Kip's trying to communicate. I originally was quite interested in Peter Flint's work, and I'm actually a big fan of his, especially with his Isaiah translation for the ISV Bible. Unfortunately, he passed away, 2016? That was like a very unfortunate sudden passing. But anyway, the point is, I didn't know you guys were discussing this. It's just funny. I was doing just my own little devotions on it, and I came across 3 papers. One in 2004 by Michael L. Barr, St. Mary's Seminary and University. The title of the paper is "The Crux of Psalm 22:17c, Solved at Long Last." The 5th one was by James R. Linville for the JBL in 2005, JBL 124. And then probably the latest paper on it is by Joyce Wood, a 2019 paper, Writing and Rewriting Psalm 22. And she basically summarizes all the work on it. And what I find interesting, SJ, is that if it reads Pierce, this may sound actually quite surprising. If it reads Pierce, it doesn't actually fit prophetically with Jesus. So, because, for example, James Linville's paper points out that you have sort of like a chiasm in 17. So you have, "For dogs surrounded me, a gang of criminals encircled me, then question mark, my hands and my feet." And then Kip is pointing out, well, and everyone's pointing out, well, is it like a lion? And even there was one scholar, oh God, I forgot his name. I think it's Rensburg. But he says, isn't it interesting? It's lion singular. Oh, I think I'm getting this right. It's like lion singular, but it should be lions plural. Because how can a lion like circle around? You're meant to have a pack of lions, but the point is the imagery is such that you have, dogs surrounding, a gang surrounding, and then like how a lion pounces and tears up the body. Hence this very sudden image of it's just what's left is just the hands and the feet. And then Linville's point is that the 2019 paper, Joyce Wood's paper using Linville's conclusion, says that if you were to translate it like this, so I'll just read it out. In fact, I'll share my screen. Let me share my screen so you can see the paper itself. This actually fits very well with then the victim that the psalm is trying to communicate, the extent of the devastation of the victim. So metaphorically thinking is the essential language of poetry and its primary meaning. Blah blah blah. So the ferocious brutality of human predators who compass, confine, terrorize, attack. And then we are compelled to consider the possibility that human beings are bulls, dogs, and lions. Just as a lion circles to attack the rear extremities of an animal, so a mob encircles to maim or disjoint the victim's hands and feet. So then, for dogs surround me, a gang of villains encircle me, like a lion. So this is the translation issue. my hands and feet. So then, this is that Michael, I think his name is Bar, I could be mispronouncing that surname, but this paper he wrote, using that same translational context, points out that you know how the psalmist talks about, I can count all my bones, I can count like my body parts. Well, how can you do that if you're not mangled up and dismembered and torn up and so on? So the point then is, if I go right down to, I'm just trying to rush to the
Rob, can I
conclusion. Yeah, go for it.
Can I ask
Go for
quickly?
it. I'm
Did
just
you
trying to
did you read the? I'm just curious if you read the paper by Brent Strawn on this.
I think I have that actually. Yes, the
That's
2000
also a
paper.
very, very good one.
This one? This one here?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a good paper.
So Linville is using that in this one here, this 2005 one. And he says yeah, like for example, dogs surround me, a pack of wicked ones, like a lion they circumscribe my hands and feet. And then there's, in fact, I think Strawn is the one that mentions the NRSV says that the hands and feet shrivel. Is this the paper where he makes an argument?
I don't think this is the same. I think he makes an argument very similar to the one.
I do want to say,
because Tremper Longman brings that up.
Let me just
the point. SJ,
let me
the point is, okay, go for it.
Well, I just want to point out something. Well, I've got two other people in here too, Danny and Dr. Josh. But the one thing I want to point out is I don't want to spend the whole afternoon like just narrowing in on this one little word. I mean, we were talking a lot of stuff here, lots and lots of different.
Do you think you've changed your mind though, SJ?
Like
I mean, so rather than
here it is. Sorry, here it is. That's the shriveled up stuff. So if it's sick, if in a sickness. So this is Robert's translation of this text is very close to that of the Chicago Syrian Dictionary. If in his sickness his mouth is paralyzed and his hands and his feet are shrunken, it is not a stroke, his thickness will part. This is not from the Psalm, by the way. This is, connected to that. So then he's like, look, my hands and my feet are shriveled up. Is this communicating the I mean, when you look at it in hindsight of the death of Jesus and the cross, oh yeah. It's not just a mere piercing of his hands and his feet. It's encompassing the whole body that is going through excruciating. I mean, again, Dr. Kip, I know those who do that type of pesha, right? Like they try and apply it to Jesus. But all I'm saying is, speaking as a Christian, I can't help but go, wow, the imagery, when you see it this way, matches even more with the crucifixion of Jesus than just a mere that it has to be pierced, like you see what Peter Flynn tries to argue. So I just wanted to come in and just want to be the middleman in that. So
yeah, I mean it's consistent with Isaiah 52 when it references that he was barely recognizable. He'd been so beaten. So.
But what about? Do you think that has
Dr.
changed
Kip
your
is
mind,
not,
SJ?
Yeah,
changed my mind about
Dr. Kip's not.
What? No, I'm not changing. I believe the Psalm 22 is a prophetic passage that relates to Jesus' crucifixion. I think Rob is only highlighting that point, and he's actually reinforcing the point that the suffering servant was in a ton of pain, and that's something consistent with Isaiah 52.
But the translation.
But it's not
sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead. But that's not exclusive to crucifixion, and I think this point also bears reinforcement that it's astonishing if this passage actually referred to nails being inserted into the hands or the wrists in a crucifixion. It's rather astonishing that not a single New Testament author ever cited this verse.
Yeah, and that's what
as a fulfillment of prophecy.
See, even if that word is supposed to be like a lion, I think anybody who's kind of hyper prophecy, prone to type of thinking would be like, oh, well, it's using the word lion there. So since Jesus is the Lion of Judah, this could still apply to something prophetic, lying, depending,
And that's
regarding Christ.
fine. That's totally fine. And I don't deny at all that that this certainly has been used by the church for centuries as an illustration of a prophecy that was fulfilled in Jesus. I don't deny that at all. I just think that there are much more plausible historical explanations for what's happening in the text. And I really don't think that you can point to the Septuagint, which also says Doug, by the way, as a means of saying, look, this is a perfect description of Jesus being nailed to the cross.
I know Michael Brown and James White both did a talk on it, but I don't know what they said. I have to look at it. And I respect Michael Brown. I think Michael Brown might be taking a position that's more towards your position, Kip. So, but I don't know for sure.
I have heard Michael Brown, and I've referenced them, Dr. Brown and Dr. White, and Dr. Brown takes a position that's consistent with the interpretation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that it's referring to something that translates as pierced.
Oh, okay.
Let's be clear here: the Dead Sea Scrolls do not interpret the passage as pierced.
Well, Dr. Michael Brown does. So he looked at the word ka'aru, and
Kip's like the world's expert on the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Or
I'm not the world's expert on the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Well, one of it's like in terms of no, is that not right? No. Who would
never ask an academic if they're an expert in something, and they're always going to say no. No, me, of course not. I'm not an expert. My God, did I write my dissertation on it? I worked on it for 30 years. Yeah, but I'm not an expert there.
Can I ask Dr. Kip another clarifying point about SJ, if you could share my screen again, and then it's only like a minute. So in Linville's paper near the end, so this is the bit I wanted to come up to. So notice you have verse 18 where you have then the added, I count all my bones. So he prefers to translate it as, dogs surround me, a gang of evildoers in circles dismembers me. So this is why I want to clarify with you if this is an accurate, if he's being accurate with the translation. And then this bit is obviously the contention, right? Because he thinks like a lion, because they have picked clean my hands and my feet. And then what happens once a lion dismembers? Like, see, he says he takes that word and can also mean dismember. Finding circle or dismember does not depend on relocating to that clause. But anyway, the point is the logic or the flow of the passage leads to... Oh, wait.
If I could just quickly point out, like,
yes,
where'd he go?
just to, like, if it's not obvious, the reason that so many papers are written on this passage, and each of the papers say things like circling back again to Psalm 22:17, or is this really, is this the final solution or something, is because it's incredibly difficult to figure out what the hell it means. And it's because, as Dr. Kip was talking about, scribes make errors all of the time. My advisor, Paul Del Nero, did his dissertation on these 10 Sumerian literary texts, and they have thousands of copies of them, and they're all from the early second millennium. They're all from the time that the students wrote them out. They're not like later copies that have been copied and recopied. They're the originals, right? They're the scribal exercises. And my God, they're like every line, there are either mistakes, or they're copying the line incorrectly, or they're switching out a verb, part of the verbal chain that's incorrect. And he wrote a whole book on it, right? Trying to figure out what it means to have like an original text. Is that even a thing? But yeah, I mean, it's unsurprising, in my opinion. It's unsurprising at all that a scribe would, make a mistake, and that another scribe would come along and not be sure of what's going. It's textual criticism. It's why it's a field.
And I
It's
think this
reasonable.
is
Somehow I
this is
lost
a-
all the. So I lost Rob. I lost Sal. I lost.
I think
Where'd
I think
everybody
Rob
go?
crashed. His computer
Michael?
said out of memory, and then and I think
Oh, Rob
Sal.
crashed?
Yeah, I'm not convinced. I don't know. This is maybe a little uncharitable, but I think it's very difficult when people that you disagree with are given a space to talk, and then they start providing reasons, good reasons that aren't being pushed back against in various ways to believe something different from what you believe. I think it's very difficult to stick around and listen to that. And I think it's really virtuous when people do that sort of thing and change their mind.
Just to kind of pick up on what Dr. Josh said, and to maybe even provide a bit of a summary of how I see this issue. And this is, for me, this is just simply a good exercise in the, employing Occam's razor to a situation. Can I just share my screen for like 30 seconds quickly again?
Yeah.
And
Actually,
while you do that,
here's because I see what I'd like to do. And actually, I want to find that where you just did that. But what I want to do is, I know we're spending all this time talking about Psalm 22, and I'm not sure how that happened, but
It's an
but I
important
wanted
issue.
to see at the end, like if we can wrap this all up, and maybe everybody go around and give your key final points or something like that. And so we.
Okay, well, I'll start with mine. This is an exercise in Occam's razor. And as Dr. Josh pointed out, scribal error is a real thing, and it happened all the time in antiquity. And with this particular error, this vaviode transference, the confusion of these two letters, which were notoriously similar in many texts from antiquity, it happens probably more than any other type of scribal error in Hebrew. So the situation is like this. The original word read ka'ari, employing the word lion, ari. It was mistranscribed by a careless scribe to look like this, where the yod was replaced with a vav. The Septuagint, the Greek translator, encountered a manuscript like this and didn't know what to do with it. And so, I misspelled these. How embarrassing of me. Anyways, the Septuagint translator came along and did his best to try and figure out what he thought the text said based on how it appeared before him, and came up with this translation, Horaksan Cheras Mu Ki Podas, which literally means they dug my hands and feet. And overzealous Christian interpreters after in the centuries following the establishment of the church came to understand this as a fulfillment of prophecy. And to my mind, that makes eminently more sense than as originally a description of a crucifixion at some time prior to the Babylonian exile. If this was actually a psalm that was written prior to the Babylonian exile, I'm not even sure.
So let me get a clarification of what you're saying, so make sure I understand what you're saying here. So you're saying in ancient times, you knew that it should be like a lion, but some Hebrew made it so it ends instead in the other letter. And how do you know that in ancient times the original should have been like a lion instead of being something translated as Doug?
Well, because the scribal error, as it appears,
how do you know?
in
How do you know
this,
though?
Well, I mean, how do we know anything? I'm saying
No, how do you know? But you're saying in ancient times there was a scribal error, and I'm trying to get out of you to tell me, how do you know that it was originally one letter and not the other? How do you know the scribe made an error?
Let me finish my sentence this time. First, Josh, can I finish my sentence this time?
Please, yeah.
It's because the word as it appears in the Nachal Hever Psalm, Kaf, Aleph, Resh Vav doesn't mean anything. It doesn't.
According to you.
No, I mean, look it up in a Hebrew dictionary. It's not there.
Could
Well,
you
'cause Dr. Michael Brown-
transliterate it? Could you
Dr.
try and
Michael
like
Brown
transliterate it?
does. No, Dr. Michael Brown says it does mean something. It means ka'aru, and that's what he basically went into an entire conversation about.
The only way he can get there is to understand it as a misspelling.
Ooh,
As
wow.
in somebody
Some thunder here.
misspelled the verb.
Did you guys
Because
hear that
second
thunder at my
letter-
house?
I did
Yeah, I
hear
heard
that.
it.
That was crazy.
There's
It's,
a tropical storm coming through here. Unfortunately, let me turn.
Well,
my
maybe that's
volume
not
up.
better. I was going to say it's so smoky here we can't even go outside. But it's yes, it's
Oh,
a.
sorry.
No, okay, go ahead, John.
I was just going to try to give like maybe an easy example of how textual criticism, like how, and just to be clear so that everybody knows, like Dr. Kipp and Emmanuel Tove worked very, very closely together. And Emmanuel Tove is like one of the preeminent textual critics. I don't think it's unfair to say of our time. So like this is what Emmanuel Tove, he wrote the book on textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible.
3 editions now.
Yeah. So like one of a really clear example is when scribes copy things out, you know, they're looking at a manuscript, not always, but they're quite often looking at a manuscript, and then they're going over here, their eyes move over here to write out what they just looked at, and then they go back. There are a lot of words in a lot of different languages, but certainly in Hebrew that end the same way, right? And so the eye, you know, let's say they're in line 5 of a manuscript, and they see the ending im, which is a very common Hebrew ending. And they say they've got those 3 words they're going to copy out. So then they move over here and they write it out and it ends in im, and they turn back and their eye catches another ending im. And they think it's the word that they just left because that's the one they're looking for. But it's actually an im that's 3 lines down. And they keep copying from 3 lines down. So now they're in line 8 or 9, whatever. And so now in this manuscript, those 3 lines are missing. They're just gone. So a textual critic, when they come back and they've got all these manuscripts laying out in front of them, and they say, okay, so these, you know, all have lines 6, 7, and 8, but this manuscript for some reason doesn't have 6, 7, and 8. Well, how can we postulate what happened here? And then they look and they see, okay, that word ends in im, this word ends in im. It looks like they just had, their eye went to the same ending, right? And that's a type of scribal error. It's an unintentional scribal error. And there are lots of different ways that scribes make those errors, not just in Hebrew and you know, in any language. So then, like, how do you know that's what happened? Well, as Dr. Kipp said, like, no, but like this is what scholars do as they're looking at those types of things and saying, what's the most reasonable explanation here? Is it a pattern that we see? And then the last thing, and then I'll be quiet. I saw somebody in the side chat, I think it was Slam RN, said that the example that I gave for Old Babylonian period Sumerian literary texts, that they were scribal exercises. They absolutely were scribal exercises. They were the advanced students doing scribal exercises, the last stage of their learning that they were copying. So they were just about full scribes. But I'm just using it as an example. These advanced scribal students who knew Sumerian very, very well made all kinds of errors like this. So, yeah.
Yeah, I apologize. My computer crashed. I was doing a render, and then it just it just crashed. So, but I don't know how much that came through. I don't know if it got to the bit about the counting all the bones, but that breakdown, that deductive approach that Linville was trying to communicate. So Dr. Kipp, if, like, I'm sure you may have come across that as one of many types of translational possibilities.
Yeah, and I think that one's probably my favorite too. And I will say, I mean, the thing about the presence of Ke'ari in this particular verse is it makes abundant sense. Lions are featured prominently throughout this psalm.
Right. And lions were known to be in Israel, right? In those times as well, if I'm not mistaken. Hence this like lion of the tribe of Judah. And
Let me just say something really quickly. So this is I did want to go around and have you guys sort of say your points on either this topic or on prophecies in general, or even if you want to talk about what you do believe. I know Rob's a Christian. I don't know where the rest of you guys stand, especially Nathan, because Nathan's kind of waffled back and forth. But before I did that, I wanted to say that Isaiah 53 learning in the chat is an interesting character, because this person formed an account on the day that I went to protected my account on Twitter in January 30th. Isaiah 53 learning formed an account that day and tried to follow me, and then suddenly started showing up in my chats. And I decided that this person is probably coming from the other side, pretending to be a Christian because of the type of tweets that I read on the timeline. And so I'm just pointing that out. Now the person is in the chat right here, pretending that he or she is falling away from beliefs in Christianity. But I think that this person is not a Christian in the first place, which is why that person's still trying to follow me on Twitter. And I've rejected the application a couple of times, and it keeps showing up. So anyway. So Rob, you're sharing something.
one more thing I'll share. This is the other one by Gary Rensburg, Hebrew Philological Notes, Hebrew Studies 2002, and he down here, where is it? Here it is. So under Psalm 22:17. Now, I don't know if this is legit, because again, I'm only just starting to learn the languages and so on. But I mean, I like the scholar in other works. I find his explanation on, say, Genesis very interesting. So I don't know if this is just him sort of going down into like a educational guess, but he's like, look, so he goes, in my view, the lack of a verb in this stitch is explicable along the following lines. So then he's like, for dogs surround me, a pack of evildoers encircle me, after which follows the problematic, like a lion, my hands and my feet. The absence of a verb indicates the suddenness with which the attack comes. We experience the anguish of the psalmist. He is surrounded by enemies, and suddenly the pounce and the immediate cry about hands and feet under attack. The lack of a verb is an example of form following content. The speed with which a lion, or better, a lioness, pounces on its prey is indicated by the speed with which the verse reaches its climatic end, passing over the unnecessary verb in order to highlight the pain of the psalmist as if his very limbs are rent asunder. Now notice, this is before Linville and the others, in their own way, because I noticed that they didn't actually refer to this paper. So I don't know if they were aware of Renberg's argument. But it's just interesting that Renberg is basically hypothesizing that it's so sudden, and then that's why you count all your bones. It's like bang. It's like, it's just like as if a grenade's exploded, and then what's the next result? It's just pieces of the body. And so this is probably my last request of a reaction by the scholars in the room. If what do you think of this explanation?
I think it's creative. I don't know. I don't know if I buy it. I mean, I think something that you discover in lots of biblical Hebrew poetical texts is the very frustrating absence of verbs. That
Okay.
I mean, it occurs pretty frequently. And I just to that I'm like, I don't know, maybe, but I don't know if I'm overly convinced by that.
Okay, yeah. Because my favorite happens to be Linville's and also the summarization in a 2019 paper. Oh, and by the way, SJ, Michael Heiser has himself, in his Unseen Realm book, when he goes through the matrix of prophecies, like prophecies in that matrix mosaic sense, that's how the New Testament authors repurpose it. There's actually a footnote where he goes, "You may have thought I missed verse 17 of Psalm 22," and then he goes, "I haven't." And then he explains by saying, "Look, it's a matrix in itself," to try and weed out the details. So I just want to point out that Heiser himself has, in his own works, has also said, look, we shouldn't be jumping to conclusions about whether it's pierced or not, and yeah.
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, it's definitely interesting stuff. So let's go around. We'll start as Nathan, maybe then Dr. Kip, then Rob. I'm just kind of going as I see you guys on the screen, then Danny, then Dr. Josh. If you guys want to maybe parting shots or something that you want to say that you've been trying to bring in here. So I know Kip actually already went into his final explanation. So if you don't want to add on to that, or you just wanted to also maybe share what you're working on or where people can find you, that'd be really helpful too.
Okay. In terms of me, what the things that I've got to say, I think I'll just reflect on some of this. I don't think it would be right to like take a parting shot or something where, you know, there's not the space to reply or anything. I mean, firstly, I think that this is a great thing that you've let people who disagree with you come on, because I think that if we, you know, are wrong about something, the only way that we're going to find out is through disagreement. And I don't think any of us want to just be mean to someone or beat them over the head or something that we disagree with. We want to actually provide like good reasons and try and figure out what's true. And so I applaud like letting people on. And then the other thing I just want to say is I think that we can see how difficult it can be if we have one belief that's really, really valuable and important to us, that then might inform how we form like auxiliary beliefs around that about other things. And then it can be very, very, very difficult for us to look at some of those auxiliary beliefs with sort of more objective eyes. And I think we've seen in this case, for example, Rob coming in and saying it's not a problem for the Christian. Look, you can actually agree with everything they say, but it becomes very difficult, I think, when you couple it to that stuff. Now, I'd consider myself an agnostic Christian just in terms of what was said before, but I do find it, you know, I find it very, very difficult to believe the kind of claims that were sort of mentioned today about China being related to the end times, about like...
No, I didn't say that, Nathan. I clarified that. What in the world?
Oh, sorry. Well, okay, so in terms of, I just wouldn't mention any, like that stuff isn't, maybe I'll just say that isn't relevant to any kind of religious beliefs I might have. I might say that. Like I have a really low confidence about it. And I think that the best thing to do is just to invite like the relevant experts on, have conversations with them. And I think we've made some good progress today on the topic of the correct translation of what, you know, certain passages in the Old Testament should be. And I think that hopefully people have seen that and can take something away.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I did. Let me just make it really clear here so that nobody makes a video that says that I'm claiming that China is involved in the end times. I was merely pointing out that some of the things that China's doing could be reflected in what you saw in Revelation. That's all I'm saying.
And nothing connected to the Bible, but I'm sorry, I'm saying, speaking as Australian here, I'm not going to make a comment about China and the Bible, but China is actually a major threat to Australia as I speak. They're making a lot of threats.
SJ, do you think that the United States could be involved in the same way?
Could be. Yeah, you never know. I mean, really, there's a lot of arguments you can make against the United States if you look into that too. So you want to go to, let's see, Kip, did you want to say anything else? And then I'll come down to Rob.
So I think, I mean, my whole thing is pointing out, trying to educate people on how to use the languages correctly, how they can be abused, and that's sort of the content of the videos on my channel. And this is this is a clear case in point. And yes, it looks like a small thing. I've seen in the chat here a lot of people said, wow, it's just one word. Maybe you have convinced me about the translation issue, but big deal. And yeah, sure, that's fair. But then it's also frustrating that people continue to go back to this same well and talk about this as if it's a fulfilled prophecy, despite the numerous issues with this passage. So I guess I'll just finish with that. Apologetics is fine. Bad apologetics is beyond annoying and frustrating, especially to those of us who work in the field and who actually deal with these issues on a regular basis and in painstaking detail.
Okay, fair enough. Want to go to Rob?
I came in last minute. Didn't expect to be discussing about this. It's uncanny because I was doing a little tangent sort of rabbit hole thing with that psalm, and then sure enough the psalm's being discussed, and I'm like, ooh, I'll share some stuff. But I didn't know, I didn't know it was this intense, I guess. But I hope I sort of settled the dust down a little bit. And but yeah, I appreciate the interaction as well, Dr. Kip. And I was going to say, it's kind of slipped my mind. Oh boy. Yeah. No. Well. Anyway. No, it's okay. It'll probably come back later on. But oh no, that's right. I do want to emphasize that I don't think Dr. Kip is saying that Peter Flint is a sloppy scholar. Maybe he had a bias in some sense with that reading or something. I don't know, but I do. No, yeah.
Yeah, I'll clarify.
Maybe you want to clarify something. And
sure, Peter Flint was a really, really good scholar. He was, and his work on Isaiah was tremendous. And SJ, you actually you pointed out a passage from Isaiah 53 that Peter Flint had a direct hand in helping us, in discovering and communicating the correct reading
light rendering
of a passage, the like a light passage. Yeah, I mean, this was the product of a scribal error, and we found the manuscript to show us where the error occurred, and it got corrected. Thank you, Peter Flint, for that. But Peter Flint was also a very, very deeply committed evangelical Christian. And in my personal opinion, sometimes and I knew the guy for many years. Sometimes those commitments weighed much more heavily in his writing and in his thinking than just a straightforward approach to the texts.
But just a lovely individual as well, like the way he would talk and present himself.
Just a fantastic guy. He was just a fantastic guy. I miss him quite a bit.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to say as well, and then that's my piece.
That's reasonable. So how about Danny?
I got here too late, so I have nothing to say.
How about Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Michael Brown, like as a person. Like he and I are, I think, fairly close. We text with some regularity. And I mean, I think he'd be the first person to say, we just like had a conversation a couple weeks ago live. And I mean, he'd be the first person to say that I would, conclude that he comes to the text very differently than I do, and that I disagree with how he does that. And he would say the same thing about me. But I think sort of to just follow up a little bit on this, I see this a lot, and not just me, but other scholars in the field, particularly on topics like the formation of the Pentateuch, or the historicity of the Exodus account. Like these are things that you'll have scholars that, in most people's opinions that are in the field, would say that like their work is very good, exceptional, until it hits a certain area of study. And when it hits that area of study, because of theological commitments, that sometimes they will say, here's why I say this. I interpret this way because of my theological commitment. And I think it's just in those areas that we, all need to be able to take a step back and say, okay, why might they interpret it this way? Why might they read it this way? Why might they look at these same data points and structure a model that nobody else is utilizing? Why is that? And like Michael Brown is well trained. I only bring him up because he's brought up a lot here. Like he was well trained. I think he was up at New York, but studied A&E and Hebrew Bible. I mean, like he's a really, really smart guy. But again, I think that, there are theological commitments that he has, and I think that he would say that they can color the way that he interprets data, and I think that's something he acknowledges, and probably wouldn't say is in that situation necessarily the wrong thing to do, although I might. So, yeah.
Is it possible that people who have a commitment against religion or anti-theist or that kind of view could also color some of their interpretations?
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me,
happens too.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's no question. I mean, like, there's no escaping bias. This is one of the reasons.
I was gonna say I don't know if Josh, if how much of his stuff you read, but I mean I'll bring up a name here. Anybody who reads Lester Gravy is, I mean, he's a great historian. He's a great Second Temple Jewish historian. Not that he's Jewish, I don't think he is. But he's a great historian of Second Temple Judaism. But there are numerous times in his writings where you see he very clearly has an axe to grind against Christianity, against American evangelical Christianity. But when you're in the field, you do get a sense, and you are able to develop tools and skills to sort of weed through all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is the reason I think that, at least on our channel and in most of the stuff that I write, we try to lean very heavily on presenting consensus scholarship on these controversial issues. What is it that the majority of scholars or the consensus is on these positions? Because I think, I mean, I've seen this firsthand. I'm sure Dr. Kip sees it all the time. I'm sure many of us have. Academia has a way of sort of working through those things because we're all dealing with the same data points. Once somebody's discovery comes out, or once something gets excavated, or once a new manuscript is found, that becomes a data point. And we're all working, if we're doing our jobs well, we're all working with the data points. It's just where we differ are the interpretive models that we're constructing. And I think that once those interpretive models are constructed, I mean, that's what peer review does, right? Is other academics go, you seem to, for whatever your reason is, this doesn't really work, right? This isn't the most reasonable conclusion.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Can I also just say, SJ, when you mentioned Dr. Brown, were you saying that Brown prefers the reading Pierce?
Yes.
And is this in his answering Jewish objections? Is that where you got it from, or?
No, I didn't get it out of his. I have read that one of those volumes of that book, but I got it from his video with James White. That's one of his videos. He's actually made a number of videos on it. So I quoted the one from James White, but I've heard other videos where he's just gotten up and talked about Psalm 22, and he puts the words out there and he puts his interpretations and he explains the reasoning. And then he even says at the very end of it, he said, even if it is like a lion, lions don't lick your hands and feet.
Can I, this is I hate to do this to you, SJ, but it sounds like I'm. Yeah. Anyway, I'll just share my screen again. I just want to show. This is. So I have Dr. Brown's answer. Answering Jewish objections. I did a keyword search specifically about that verse. There's a whole section on it because the claim is Psalm 22 does not speak of death by crucifixion. In fact, the King James translators changed the words to speak piercing. And he agrees. He's like, look, yeah, the very verse that is the subject of so much controversy is a verse that the New Testament never quotes, not once. Still, the charge is made that later Christian translators, specifically the King James translators, intentionally alter the meaning of the Hebrew text of this verse, introducing the word pierced in place of the Hebrew like a lion. Now then he does go into a little bit of backdrop with supposedly certain rabbis discussing the verse. And
Rabbi Singer, he debated him on that.
yeah, like Rabbi Singer here, and then he does, and this is, I think, for another time, because I don't want to take up too much time, but maybe Dr. Kip can elaborate more on what Dr. Brown's trying to get at here. But apparently there's certain Masoretic scholars, he quotes Peter Flint here, like from the Dead Sea Scrolls, but then he goes into that there's some notes in the Masoretic text, apparently. I can't clarify. I don't know because I'm only just reading this now. But yeah, like for example, here in this instance, with respect to Isaiah 38:13, apparently you can read it as breaking, whereas Psalm 22 the meaning is ambiguous. Like, so Dr. Brown is being as faithful as he can to the scholarship, and I think, again, this is just communicating to me that he's laying out all the options, and he himself says, and I just want to point this out, he says, if I go back up here again, he goes, how should we respond to such charges? It is best to answer these charges in a dispassionate and calm spirit, simply weighing the evidence and asking the question, what is the verdict of honest and non-biased scholarship? And then he does say up here somewhere about the New Testament, how we should not be threatened by this, like even if the New Testament authors didn't use this. And yeah, anyway, but
And I think the point that Dr. Brown is
wait,
making here.
Here it is.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Here it is. Yeah. We must also bear in mind that there is actually no need to try to defend or vindicate the translators of the King James or other Christian versions. The truth of the New Testament surely doesn't rise or fall on the accuracy of translations completed more than 1,500 years later. That would be like questioning the reliability of the Hebrew Bible based on an alleged mistranslation of a particular passage made by a panel of rabbis centuries later. How does a mistranslation by later translators affect the accuracy or reliability of the original? Obviously it doesn't.
And I'm not saying this to be like horrible or anything, but that was one of your arguments, SJ, as well, for going with this translation. What modern translations have in them is pierced, right?
I actually was leaning a lot on Dr. Brown. I don't know if I have that particular. I have one book called Answering Jewish Objections, but I think he's got different series. I think that's part of a series, so I don't know if I have that one.
That's volume 3. Yeah, I think he's released like 5 volumes. And
I mean, the reasons you were providing to go with pierced, though, sorry, that was one of the arguments you went with.
I went with what Dr. Michael Brown said with respect to Ka'ari and Ka'aru. I looked at what the interpretation of the Dead Sea Scrolls from Dr. Michael Brown's perspective, and I looked at the Septuagint, and that's why I went with pierced. But
maybe
Doug.
Brown, and this is something I think Kip pointed out, which I didn't know, by the way, but maybe Brown's relying on the word of Flint's translation and not actually looking at the extent of how much you can translate out of that manuscript. And
yeah, and I think I do think an important point to note here too is that there was, prior to the discovery of the Nachal Hever scroll, there was some suggestion that that it wasn't a widely held suggestion, but some sort of adopted this conspiratorial stance that the Christians were fudging the text and changing the reading in the Septuagint unfairly. And what the discovery of the Nahal Hever scroll showed us was that this was an honest mistake. There was no conspiracy involved here. This is an error that someone made, and it got passed down in the textual tradition, in transmission, and it became something that it originally wasn't. And I will say something else, like Dr. Flint's academic writing on this subject is fairly dispassionate, and he says this is how he presents it. He says, here's the reading Ka'aru in the Nahal Hever scroll, which would agree with what the Septuagint translated. And yes, that's totally accurate. But then in his talks, and I suspect this will happen with Dr. Brown as well, when Peter spoke to churches about this issue, he played it up quite a bit more than he ever would in front of his academic colleagues, and this is the reason.
Okay, well, let me I want to say thank you to everybody who's come in here today. I really appreciate having you guys, and I like the shared opinions, and I agree with some of the points that you guys have made on Psalm 22. That portion of Psalm 22 does not appear in the New Testament, and the mention of piercing does not appear in the New Testament, is the reference to Psalm 22:16 in the English translations of the Bible. And so I will point that out, but I will also say that's kind of a neat thing just to point out is the very first verse of Psalms did point our attention to it. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Just like the very first verse of Psalm 31, into your hands I commit my spirit. That's also directing our attention to Psalm 31, which I hadn't really realized until a couple of days ago. So I'm fascinated by what I'm reading in the Psalms, and I've been looking at the different translations. So that's what I'm working on. I'm working on looking at different English translations and how different people through the centuries have decided to translate the ancient verbs and words into the text. And so I find that super interesting. And so I know that it goes, I know that Kip doesn't like what I do sometimes, and he made a video that kind of disparaged me, but that's okay. I still have Kip on here so he can make his points. And so thank you guys for coming on here.
Thanks, SJ.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. Yeah,
thank you.
All right, thank you. Does anyone want to say how he can find you, or if you guys want me to post something on you in the description, if you want me to do that, just go ahead and share that in the chat or something, and I'll put that out there too. So if you guys want links to your channels or anything like that in the description, actually, do you want it? I think all of you have channels, and I can find them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
I mean, I know Nathan's got a channel, Kip's got a channel. The only one I don't know is Danny. Do you have a channel? Oh, Phil Talk. Danny does have a channel.
SJ, you hurt my feelings every time I come in here.
No, you do have a channel. I forgot. Phil Talk. Yeah, you've got a channel. So I'm going to go ahead. I will post links to your channels plus Sal's and others who came in here, Veckles, and we'll do all that so people can get a hold of you guys. Okay.
I was joking, by the way.
Sorry, this is my bad memory. Terrible. Sorry. So thank you guys. Just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Thank you for coming in and sharing your opinions and some scholarly thoughts there too. And Digital Hammurabi, I'm going to post his link too. So thank you guys.